You're on the edge of something real. A promotion is within reach. A relationship is deepening. A creative project is about to launch. A dream is becoming tangible. And just as it's about to happen, just as the threshold approaches, something in you activates. Suddenly, you're tired. Suddenly, you're doubtful. Suddenly, a small voice reminds you of past failures. Suddenly, you start to convince yourself that maybe now is not the right time. Maybe you need to prepare more. Maybe you should wait. Maybe you're not actually ready, and you pull back. You find a reason to hesitate. You sabotage the exact thing you said you wanted, and then you feel confused. You feel frustrated. You feel like there's something fundamentally wrong with you, like there's a self-destructive impulse inside you that you can't control. But what if this isn't self-destruction? What if this is self-protection? What if there's a part of you that's so terrified of what happens if you actually succeed that it will do almost anything to keep you safe in the familiar territory of not trying? What if the shadow that's sabotaging your future is not your enemy but your bodyguard? A bodyguard that's protecting you from something you're not even aware you're afraid of. British psychoanalyst Donald Winnicott discovered something that changed how we understand self-sabotage. He found that most people develop what he called a false self, a version of themselves that's designed specifically to be acceptable, to be likable, to be safe. And alongside this false self lives a true self, the parts of you that are authentic, the parts of you that have genuine desires, the parts of you that contain potential and power and creativity. And the tragedy is that these two selves are usually in direct conflict. The false self is constantly working to prevent the true self from emerging. And that conflict, that internal sabotage, is what keeps you trapped. It keeps you small, it keeps you safe, but it also keeps you imprisoned. If you're willing to look at this directly, if you're willing to understand what the sabotage is actually trying to do, then you can finally move beyond it. But you have to be willing to see what you've been hiding from yourself. So prepare yourself. Because what's about to be revealed is not comfortable. It's not meant to be, but it's necessary. And it might just be the key to finally breaking free from the patterns that have been running your life. You didn't wake up one day and decide to betray yourself. It happened slowly. It happened because survival required it. It happened because at some point in your life, usually very early, you learned that certain parts of you were not acceptable. Certain needs were too demanding, certain feelings were too inconvenient, certain desires were too shameful, certain strengths were too threatening. And so you learned to hide them. You learned to perform a version of yourself that was more palatable to the people around you. You learned to smile when you felt rage. You learned to be small when you felt powerful. You learned to be quiet when you had things to say. You learned to defer when you wanted to lead. You learned to apologize for your existence. You learned to make yourself less in order to be more acceptable. And over years, over decades, this performance became so habitual that you forgot it was a performance. The false self became so automatic that you started to believe it was who you actually were. You stopped being able to access the person underneath. The person with desires, the person with opinions, the person with power, the person with ambition. That person got locked away, stored away, disowned. Psychoanalyst Winnicott understood that this false self is created in relationship. You didn't create it in isolation. You created it in response to the specific emotional environment you grew up in. If your parents were critical, you learned to criticize yourself before they could. If they were emotionally unavailable, you learned not to need them and not to need anyone. If they were controlling, you learned to control yourself preemptively. If they were judgmental, you learned to be perfectly compliant. You learned, in other words, to do their job for them. You internalized their voice. You internalized their standards. You internalized their disapproval. And now that voice lives inside you. It's not their voice anymore. It's your voice. You've made it your own. And it's telling you all the reasons why you can't do the things you want to do. All the reasons why you should play small. All the reasons why success would be bad. all the reasons why you need to stay exactly where you are. The false self is sophisticated. It's not stupid. It actually looks a lot like a real person. It has opinions, usually opinions designed to be inoffensive. It has goals, usually goals that won't threaten anyone. It has a personality, usually a personality that's pleasant, accommodating, predictable. It functions, it gets by. It maintains relationships by never being too much. It maintains employment by being reliable and undemanding. It maintains safety by never standing out, never threatening, never revealing what's actually underneath. But here's what makes the false self so insidious. The moment the false self starts to succeed, the moment it actually achieves something, the true self inside, the self that's been locked away, starts to get nervous. Because success means visibility, success means being seen, success means moving out of the safe zone of mediocrity and stepping into the dangerous zone of prominence. And the true self that's been in hiding recognizes that visibility is dangerous, because visibility means exposure. Exposure means people might discover who you really are. And if they discover who you really are, they might reject you, they might judge you, they might hurt you. And so the sabotage activates. The hidden self starts to throw wrenches into the works. Because keeping you unsuccessful, keeping you invisible, keeping you small, that's how it keeps you safe. What's particularly cruel about this mechanism is that you experience it as your own failure. You don't recognize it as sabotage. You think you're just not disciplined enough. You think you're not motivated enough. You think you're not smart enough. You think you're not deserving enough. You take the sabotage personally. You make it mean something about who you are. You use it as evidence that you don't have what it takes. And in doing so, you align with the sabotage. You reinforce it. You actually help the false self keep the true self locked away, because now you've got an internal narrative that justifies the keeping small. Now you've got reasons. Now you've got evidence. You're not being sabotaged by something outside you. You're being sabotaged by something inside you. And because it's inside you, because it feels like it's coming from you, it's far more effective than any external threat could ever be. You can fight an external enemy, but an enemy inside the castle, an enemy that wears your face and speaks with your voice, an enemy that you can't quite locate because it is you, that enemy is almost impossible to fight. Somewhere inside you, there are gifts you've never claimed, strengths you've never acknowledged, potential you've never pursued, power you've never wielded. And the reason you haven't claimed these things is not because you don't have them. The reason is that claiming them would be dangerous. It would violate the agreement you made with yourself and with the world. The agreement that says you're not one of those people. You're not ambitious. You're not talented. You're not capable of leading. You're not someone who takes center stage. You're someone who supports. You're someone who helps. You're someone who stays in the background. You're someone who doesn't ask for too much. You're someone who's grateful for what they have and doesn't reach for more. That's your role. That's your agreement. That's your place in the system. Communication researcher Paul Ekman spent decades studying facial expressions and discovered something remarkable. People display micro-expressions all the time. Brief, involuntary flashes of genuine emotion that leak through the social mask. For a fraction of a second, the truth shows. Then it's suppressed again. The mask goes back up. But Ekman understood that these micro-expressions are the evidence of the true self trying to break through. They're moments when the real emotion, the real response, momentarily escapes the prison of social acceptability. And what this suggests is that the true self is always there. It's always trying to emerge. It's always pushing against the constraints. You might suppress it most of the time. You might have gotten very good at performing the false self. But underneath, the real you is still there. Still wanting, still feeling, still trying to express itself, still trapped. And part of you knows it. Part of you can feel that suppression. Part of you recognizes that you're not living fully, that you're holding back, that you're capable of more than you're expressing. This disowned potential is not something you lost. It's something you actively denied. It's something you said no to. Maybe you had a gift for leadership, but you decided that being a leader was selfish. Maybe you had talent for artistic expression, but you decided that pursuing art was impractical. Maybe you had capacity for deep intimacy, but you decided that vulnerability was weakness. Maybe you had ambition, but you decided that wanting things was greedy. Whatever the specific content, you made a choice, usually unconsciously, to not claim these parts of yourself. And in making that choice, in pushing that potential down, you created a kind of internal conflict. Because these disowned parts don't just disappear, they remain. They exist in your unconscious, they influence your behavior, they affect your choices, they create the self-sabotage. Because the true self, the self that contains this power and potential, is desperately trying to express itself. It's trying to break through. And it will use any means available to get your attention, including sabotaging the life you're trying to build with your false self. The tragedy is that you often interpret this as further evidence of inadequacy. The sabotage feels like proof that you shouldn't be pursuing these things anyway. It feels like confirmation that you don't have what it takes. It feels like the universe is telling you to give up and accept your limitations. But what if the sabotage is actually the opposite? What if it's the part of you that knows you're capable, that knows you're meant for more, that's desperately trying to break through the prison and express itself? What if the self-destructive impulse is actually the true self trying to sabotage the false life you've built so that you'll finally wake up and reclaim your authentic power? In that case, the sabotage is not your enemy. It's your awakening. It's your future trying to break through. Here's what most people don't understand about their own self-sabotage. It's not random. It's not irrational. It's actually perfectly rational. It's a completely logical response to a situation that your nervous system has identified as dangerous. Because in your system, in your internal world, success has been coded as dangerous. Not consciously, but deep in your nervous system, deep in the files of what you learned about the world, success is associated with risk. And your nervous system is designed to protect you from risk, so it activates protection mechanisms. It creates friction, it generates doubt, it activates fatigue, it finds reasons to hesitate. All of this is self-sabotage, but it's not self-destruction, it's self-preservation. The reason success feels dangerous is often because, in your family system, visibility was dangerous. In your childhood, maybe the more successful someone was, the more they were targeted. Maybe standing out meant being cut down. Maybe achievement meant being mocked. Maybe visibility meant being criticized. So at a deep level, at a level that's not rational but neurological, you learned that success attracts danger. And now, at an unconscious level, your nervous system is trying to protect you by keeping you unsuccessful, by keeping you invisible, by keeping you safe. This is not stupidity. This is sophistication. This is your system working exactly as it was programmed to work. The problem is that the programming is outdated. The threats that made visibility dangerous when you were a child are no longer present. But your nervous system doesn't know that. Your nervous system is still operating in child mode. It's still protecting you from dangers that no longer exist. And so it's applying the old strategy to a new situation. The old strategy of making yourself small, making yourself invisible, making yourself insignificant, and it's working perfectly at achieving what it's designed to achieve, keeping you safe, but it's making you trapped. The self-sabotage often takes the form of mysterious obstacles. Just as you're about to make a move, you get sick. Just as you're about to launch, you lose motivation. Just as you're about to commit, you start to doubt. Just as you're about to apply, you talk yourself out of it. And all of these obstacles feel like they're coming from outside circumstances or from mysterious internal weakness. But they're actually coming from a part of you that knows you're about to step into danger, a part of you that's trying to protect you. And the more you ignore this protection, the more aggressive it becomes, because if gentle obstacles don't work, more severe ones will. If fatigue doesn't stop you, maybe an injury will. If doubt doesn't stop you, maybe a crisis will. If small sabotage doesn't work, maybe big sabotage will. The system escalates until you finally get the message. This is not safe. Don't do this. Stop trying. Stay small. Stay safe. Stay visible. What makes this particularly insidious is that you cannot logic your way out of it. Your conscious mind can know, absolutely know, that success is not dangerous, that visibility is not a threat, that you deserve to have what you want. But your nervous system doesn't care about your logic. Your nervous system operates on a different level. It operates on the level of felt sense, of pattern, of what it learned in a body that was once smaller and more vulnerable. And as long as there's a mismatch between what your logical mind believes and what your nervous system believes, the nervous system wins. The nervous system is older, it's more primal. It has direct access to your motivation, your energy, your behavior. Your logic is just along for the ride, trying to narrate what's happening and why, but the nervous system is driving, and it's driving you away from the very things you say you want. Living in a false self, maintaining a performance, keeping the true self locked away. This is exhausting. This is one of the most energetically expensive ways to live, because it requires constant vigilance. It requires that you monitor every impulse to make sure it's acceptable before it emerges. It requires that you constantly edit yourself. It requires that you remain hyper-aware of how you're being perceived. It requires that you manage everyone else's feelings so they don't become upset with you. It requires that you sacrifice your genuine response in favor of an appropriate response. It requires that you deny yourself. And all of this requires enormous amounts of energy. Energy that's not available for creativity. Energy that's not available for passion. Energy that's not available for genuine connection. Energy that's not available for building the life you actually want. Sociologist Erving Goffman studied human interaction as if it were theater. He called it impression management, the idea that all of us are constantly performing. We're all actors on a stage, playing roles, trying to manage the impression we're making. And what Goffman understood is that this performance is exhausting, that the more invested you are in a particular performance, the more energy it requires. And the more energy the performance requires, the less energy is available for actually living. You're so focused on how you appear that you can't actually engage with what's happening. You're so focused on managing others' perceptions that you can't be authentic. And over time, this takes a toll. It creates a kind of chronic fatigue, a sense that you're always tired even when you haven't done anything that should be exhausting. You're tired because you're performing. You're tired because you're managing. You're tired because you're suppressing. You're tired because you're not being yourself. And this exhaustion, this depletion, this constant drain of energy toward maintaining the false self, this is what sabotages your future. Because you don't have the energy to pursue ambitious goals. You don't have the energy to take risks. You don't have the energy to create something new. You don't have the energy to speak up. You don't have the energy to be seen. All of your energy is being consumed in the project of not being seen, in the project of being acceptable, in the project of maintaining the status quo. And so you get stuck. You stay in jobs that don't fulfill you because leaving would require risk. You stay in relationships that don't nourish you because independence would require being assertive. You stay in situations that don't serve you because changing them would require visibility. You're not stuck because you lack capability. You're stuck because all your capability is being consumed in the service of staying stuck. You're locked in a cycle where the energy you need to escape is the same energy being used to maintain the prison. What makes this worse is that the false self, by its very nature, cannot succeed in the way that matters. It can succeed at being acceptable. It can succeed at not upsetting anyone. It can succeed at fitting in. But it cannot succeed at being fulfilled. It cannot succeed at expressing authentic potential. It cannot succeed at creating genuine connection. It cannot succeed at building a life that actually feels like it's yours. Because the false self is not you. It's a mask. It's a performance. And no matter how well the performance goes, no matter how successful the mask becomes, there's still something underneath that's not being expressed. There's still something underneath that's being sacrificed. There's still something underneath that's dying, and you can feel that. On some level, you always know. And that knowing, that sense of inauthenticity, that sense of performance, that sense that you're not really living, is a constant undercurrent. It's a low-level grief. It's a chronic sense of something missing. And this feeling, this constant sense of incompleteness, is what eventually creates the explosion, the breakdown, the moment when you can't maintain the performance anymore. And that's often when real sabotage happens. That's when things fall apart. That's when the true self, desperate to be heard after years of suppression, does something dramatic to get your attention. If this is resonating with you, if you're starting to see the ways you've been performing instead of living, then hit subscribe. Because what I'm about to share is how to actually dismantle the false self, how to reclaim the parts of you that you've disowned, how to build a life that's actually yours. And that process, that reclamation, is where genuine freedom begins. The path forward is not about destroying the false self. That's a common misunderstanding. The false self served a purpose. It protected you. It helped you survive in an environment that wasn't safe enough to be fully yourself. It kept you from being hurt. It kept you from being rejected. It kept you alive. So you don't destroy it. You integrate it. You acknowledge what it did for you. You appreciate that it was designed to protect you. But you also recognize that the threats it was protecting you from are no longer present. And now it's time to develop something new, something that can be both safe and authentic, something that can maintain connection without requiring constant performance, something that can move forward without requiring self-sabotage. The first step in this integration is recognition. You have to actually see the false self. You have to recognize that you've been performing. You have to notice the places where you're editing yourself. You have to recognize the moments where you're performing rather than being present. And this recognition itself is the beginning of change, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Once you notice the performance loses its power. It becomes more obvious. It becomes more conscious. And conscious performance is always less powerful than unconscious performance. Once you're aware that you're doing it, you have choice about it. You can decide whether to continue or not. And that choice, that capacity to choose, is the beginning of freedom. The second step is slowly, carefully, beginning to let the true self emerge, not all at once, not dramatically, but in small ways, in safe situations. You might start by being more honest about what you actually think in a trusted relationship. You might start by asking for what you actually want instead of what you think you should want. You might start by expressing feelings that you've been suppressing. You might start by pursuing interests that you've denied yourself. You might start by saying no to things you don't want to do instead of automatically saying yes. These are small things, but they're revolutionary, because each time you act from the true self instead of the false self, you're building new neural pathways. You're building new evidence that it's possible to be authentic and safe. You're building new evidence that being yourself doesn't automatically result in rejection. And over time, with repetition, this new evidence starts to outweigh the old evidence. Your nervous system starts to update. It starts to recognize that the old dangers are not present. It starts to relax the protection mechanisms. It starts to allow more of the true self to emerge. The third step is addressing the specific things you're afraid of, because usually the false self is protecting you from a specific fear. Maybe it's the fear of being seen as arrogant if you claim your competence. Maybe it's the fear of being seen as needy if you express your needs. Maybe it's the fear of being abandoned if you're authentic about who you are. Maybe it's the fear of being hurt if you open yourself to vulnerability. Whatever the specific fear, you need to acknowledge it. You need to look at it directly. You need to ask yourself, what is this fear actually based on? Is this fear still accurate, or is this fear based on old information? And usually when you investigate, you discover that the fear is based on old information. It's based on what happened when you were smaller, more vulnerable, less capable of protecting yourself. And now you're larger. You're more capable. You have resources you didn't have then. You have agency you didn't have then. And yet you're still operating as if you're small and vulnerable. You're still protecting yourself against dangers that you could now handle. And recognizing that is the key to changing it. Existential psychologist Rollo May wrote about the courage that's required to become fully oneself. And he understood that this courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is moving forward despite the fear. It's doing the thing that matters, even though it's scary. It's claiming your power, even though you're afraid of what that will mean. It's being yourself, even though you're afraid of rejection. It's expressing what you actually feel, even though you're afraid of the response. This kind of courage is built through practice. It's built through small acts of authenticity. It's built through choosing to express yourself despite being afraid. And each time you do this, each time you act despite the fear, you're proving to your nervous system that the feared outcome doesn't actually occur. You're building evidence that you can survive vulnerability, that you can handle rejection, that you can speak up and not be destroyed, that you can be yourself and still be loved, that you can succeed and it doesn't result in disaster. And this new evidence, this lived experience, is what actually updates your system. It's what actually heals the deep belief that being yourself is dangerous. Everything you've been taught about success, about ambition, about taking up space in the world, much of it has been designed to keep you small. Much of it has been designed to keep you performing a version of yourself that's acceptable to others. Much of it has been designed to keep you from the very thing that would actually make your life meaningful. Being fully, authentically, unapologetically yourself. And the shadow that's been sabotaging your future is not your enemy. It's you. It's the part of you that knows you're meant for something more. It's the part of you that refuses to accept a life of quiet performance. It's the part of you that's desperate to express itself. And the sabotage is its way of trying to break through the prison you've built and remind you that you're meant to be more than this. The invitation, then, is simple. It's to stop cooperating with your own imprisonment. It's to stop maintaining the false self. It's to stop performing a version of yourself that's designed to be acceptable to others. It's to stop sacrificing your authenticity on the altar of safety. It's to gradually, carefully, courageously begin to be yourself. And yes, this is scary. Yes, this will involve some discomfort. Yes, some people might respond negatively. Some relationships might shift. Some people might not approve. But the alternative, a life of quiet suppression, a life of performance, a life where you never fully express what you're capable of, that alternative is worse, because that alternative is a kind of death. It's a slow erosion of your humanity. It's a gradual disappearance of the person you might have become. And at the end of that life, you won't regret the risks you took. You'll regret the person you didn't become because you were too afraid to express them. The shadow that's sabotaging your future is trying to save your future. It's trying to wake you up. It's trying to tell you that you're playing small, that you're hiding, that you're capable of more, that you're meant for more. And the only way to stop the sabotage is not to suppress it further, not to push it down more deeply, but to listen to it, to ask it what it's trying to tell you, to honor what it's trying to express, to gradually, carefully, courageously begin to integrate it back into your sense of self, to allow it to emerge, to claim your power, to be yourself. The future you want is not separate from you. It's not something you need to achieve. It's something you need to reveal. And the revelation begins with the willingness to be seen. It begins with the willingness to be yourself. It begins with the recognition that the shadow that's been sabotaging you is not your enemy. It's your invitation to come home, to become whole, to finally, after all these years, become who you were always meant to be. I'll see you in the next video. And I hope by then you'll have had the courage to begin listening to the part of you that's been trying to break through.